Good evening, everyone. We will just keep waiting a couple of minutes for more attendees to arrive, and we'll be starting shortly. All right, we'll get things underway. Good evening, everyone. My name is Charles Everest. I'm the General Manager of Policy and Advocacy at the Victorian Farmers Federation, and welcome to this evening's pre-harvest fire safety webinar. First of all, I'd just like to acknowledge and thank the staff at the VFF who have worked to put together this evening's webinar. Liesl Dorner, our Plant Industries Engagement Advisor, has done quite a deal of work to bring together this evening, as well as our communications team. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the CFA for their support and assistance in putting together this event and the resource. Once this webinar is recorded, it will be available to farmers in the community following tonight's event. Tonight we'll be hearing from three guest panelists about preparing for the fire season ahead. We know that things are drying out again, and we are going into a more severe fire season climate moving forward. We will be hearing from Gavin Wright, as the Acting CFA Assistant Chief Officer for District 18 in the Mallee. Gavin will be speaking tonight about preparing and ensuring you are prepared with headers and machinery going into harvest, and how you can also work as neighbours and a community to prepare. David Manifold is a volunteer with the Donald Brigade and will be speaking about preparing hay, as well as storage and transport, and doing that safely and minimising risk. And also John Darcy, who's the Senior Farm Safety Advisor with the Victorian Farmers Federation's Making Our Farms Safer campaign. And John will be giving some practical steps about how you can ensure you've got the emergency procedures in place on farm. There will be opportunities for questions, so I do encourage you to use the Q&A function and write in questions. We'll save the questions and answers until the end of the presentations, but during the presentations, please feel free to write any ideas or questions that you might have for the panelists, and they'll be answered towards the end of the webinar. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome Gavin Wright to present to us this evening.
Thank you, Charles, and thanks to VFF for this opportunity. We're really grateful in CFA for opportunities like this to I guess, reach out to grain farmers and VFF members, obviously, who are not only in the same communities that we are, but are often very closely connected to CFA as well. So yeah, really appreciate the opportunity, and thanks to Liesl for all their help, including helping to get me onto the meeting tonight after I had a couple of computer glitches right at the last moment, but we got there. So look, tonight I just want to, I guess, by outlining some things in relation to grain harvest, because it is I guess, a high risk fire activity. But the way I'm going to do it, I guess, is probably look back at some of the research we did last year in the Mallee and looked into some of our header and crop fires. And from that, then go through what we found, look at some older research as well that's been around for a little while, and then see what the takeaways are from that. And not to sort of kill my presentation right at the start, there's not a whole lot necessarily absolutely new or startling necessarily. A lot of the research sort of backs up common sense and good practice. So some of the things I'll be talking about tonight, perhaps we're under pressure or things have been against us, so we decide to perhaps take things right up to the edge, maybe to try and push through and get things done, and we go against good practices. That's probably when we're most at risk. But what I'll do now, I'll just share my screen if I can, and I'll just bring up a presentation there. Charles, if you could just indicate for me that that is sharing okay.
I can't see that yet, Gavin.
It might take a minute or two to come up. It's telling me that it is sharing, but I'll just...
we may not be able to see it, so I'll just
right.
try and do some checks to see
Righto.
how attendees can see it as well.
Righto.
Yep, that looks good now.
Okay, terrific. I'll just go and move that a little bit. So last year at the end of our harvest period, we thought we'd have a little bit of a look back at the fire calls that we had, the 000 calls that were generated from grain harvest activity, and do a little bit of research to see why the farmer or the property owner had an issue that generated a 000 call. We're more than happy to go to them, and our volunteers do down tools and go, but there's obviously not only a risk from the fire and the damage it can cause, but there's lost time for our volunteers when they obviously down tools from their farm to go and help someone out, which they're more than willing to do, but we obviously want to reduce the number of times they need to do that if we can. So at the end of our harvest period, we look back through our records, we had about 30 known incidents that required a fire brigade response. We suspected there were many more ignitions that were extinguished without notification of the fire service. So we wanted to find out about as many of those as we could, and that required our networks and talking to one person that then gave us a lead to someone else, and on we went from there. And obviously it is a high risk activity, and anything that involves hot machinery operating in a large paddock that's full of dry fuel on a warm to hot day. It doesn't take a lot for it to go wrong, and sometimes it can go spectacularly wrong, and we want to try and reduce that as much as we can. So there's an impact to the community and livelihoods and public safety in relation to it, but there's also a impact on the farmer themselves. So we're very keen to try and reduce that wherever we can. So the risk in relation to harvest, I mean, it does fluctuate with seasonal conditions. So year to year, the risk will increase and decrease. It's related also to crop type, so what paddock you're in and what's growing in that paddock at the time, the condition of the crop, the weather, the condition and the maintenance of machinery, and probably one of the largest factors also is humans, and the decisions we make is a major factor as well, and it's one that we can obviously influence. So hence why I want to talk about that a bit tonight. This is just your standard sort of risk matrix, and we're pretty big on these in emergency service, especially the fire service. So we're very much into trying to reduce the risk where we can, and we look at obviously the severity of something happening and the probability. So we look at the likelihood and the consequence. Now, we know in a general sense in relation to harvest, the likelihood of there being some type of ignition is probably pretty high, just the nature of what it is we're doing. And so we want to try and reduce the likelihood where we can. And if we're careful and we're not harvesting in times where we probably shouldn't be, we can then reduce the consequence. So we might still get the ignition might still occur, but the consequence of that might be fairly minor, and we all get to move on pretty quickly. In fact, it may not even generate a response from the fire brigade. So the consequence, high risk activity where not all the risks or the potential ignitions can be eliminated. So we focus on the consequences. I think the consequences are potentially increasing, especially in the Mallee, and I suspect it's perhaps the same in other areas of Victoria as well, but certainly it's true in the Mallee, where the potential consequence, I think, is increasing. So we've got continuous cropping going on, so less bare ground, less fallow ground on any given year. The paddocks are getting larger, the properties themselves are getting larger, and certainly the paddocks are. So it's not unusual to have paddocks of well in excess of perhaps 600 hectares across the Mallee. There's more biological matter due to farming practices as well. So there's a lot of stubble left and the like in many paddocks now. So there's more humus, more biological matter in this, which is more fuel, which means greater intensity of the fires as well. And state of the roadside. So probably don't need to say too much about that, and don't get me started about the state of some of the roadsides, certainly across the Mallee, and we're working very hard with councils and regional roads to try and reduce that risk as much as we can. And brigades across District 18 are going to be busy over the next couple of weeks doing some extensive roadside burning, which we've reintroduced into the Mallee. I know out in the Western District, they've sort of continued that on for many, many years unbroken. We sort of stepped away from it for a little while, but we're certainly getting back into that now. We think that's a really good risk treatment that we can do as well. So roadside burning is pretty important for us. So we wanted to find out the why and then see from that if we could then reduce the ignition. So we contacted the property owners and also our fire brigade incident controllers from the jobs that we knew about from our own data. And we gathered a whole heap of information. If it involved a header, we wanted to know details of that header and the type of crop, the time of day, the weather, some human factors as much as we could gain them as well. And we were really interested in the fire suppression equipment that was on hand, how much of it the operator had immediately at hand, and how effective it was when they needed it and they wanted to operate it. So we were very keen to find out whether the standard of the 9 litre water or dry chem extinguisher was enough as a minimum industry standard, or whether there was potential for that perhaps to be regulated and increased. So we made contact, as I said, with everyone we knew about, and then we chased up leads to find out about other ignitions, and we got about another 40 or so from that. And I was really pleased the way that the grain farmers were willing to open up and talk to us and share their information. We certainly approached it. We stayed away from terminology like we're doing an investigation. We sort of said, look, we're doing research. We want to sort of learn more about why we get these header fires and fires during harvest and the like. And I've got to say, all the farmers were really open and said, yeah, we'd like to know too. So we'll share whatever information we can. So they were really open and gave us a whole lot of information, which was really useful. So some of the findings, they were certainly not, no one brand or make of header stood out any worse than the others. There were certainly pockets where certain brands were noticeable, but that, to be fair, is probably related to perhaps who the local dealer is. So if your local dealer is, specialise in a particular brand, you'll probably find that a lot of the farmers around that area have that brand because there's a dealer close by and you get the service and the backup and the parts, etc. So to say that there were, it's a brand specific issue was certainly not the case. Engine mechanical failure, heat build-up, they were obviously the common causes where they were known, but there were a number of fires, both significant where the header was destroyed, or there was it was constantly causing fires behind it, where certainly the farmer and ourselves could not determine clearly what that cause was. And even the farmers that were absolutely up to date and were doing very good best sort of practice type maintenance and caution would still potentially find that they had ignitions as well. So I'm sure they had less of them because of their good practices, but it didn't totally make them immune from having issues that gave them, I guess, some difficult moments. Static electricity, I'm really conscious of an investigation that was done, started in the York Peninsula in South Australia 10 years ago by Dr. Graham Quick, which is a great piece of research. And he certainly found or came to the conclusion that he didn't think that static electricity was a factor. And I'm certainly no expert, so I don't come in with anything definitive. Certainly, we found that people fell into two camps, some who thought, no, look, it's not an issue and it's a bit of a fallacy, and others who were certainly running chains off their headers and thought it gave them some greater level of protection from doing that. But we still had, like you can see in the photos here, where we had some minor ignitions where certainly the farmer or the operator thought that static electricity was a likely factor in that. And I've got to say, these small fires that were noticed and put out or managed gave us some really good data, much more probably so than a total loss of a machine, where there's really nothing left for you to try and forensically examine that. And we went as wide as we could. It was a bit like, I guess, in some ways, almost a police investigation looking for a serial killer, if you like. If you're only looking at a certain number of the data, you're not getting the whole picture and not picking the patterns, which is why we wanted to go as wide as we could and get as much data as we could, and not just look at, a couple of instances and try and draw some definitive things from that. We knew we wanted to get as much data as we could to try and make sure what we were learning from it was as accurate and relevant as we could. So header fires were primarily occurring between 1,500 and 1,700 hours from the fires we looked at, but more broadly than that, between about 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. was certainly the peak period, and that probably aligns with peak fire danger and heat of the day type of issues. And certainly the fires that had the greatest consequence, that took off and ran and required a number of fire trucks to respond, and aircraft and the like to respond to them. They were between generally those hours as well. So, it's again, I come back to, if things are turning against you and, in the back of your mind, you're thinking you should perhaps park up for a while. Often they were between those hours, and parking up would be a wise thing to do, because it certainly reduces the likelihood of having a fire that has significant consequence. The fire suppression equipment, so it was used really extensively and effectively to extinguish smoulders, both on the machines and in the stubble or in harvested areas. And the headers were carrying the 9-litre water or the 9-kilo dry chem. On average, most machines had 2 9-litre waters on board. Having said that, where we had a catastrophic loss, often they were used and weren't effective. The 18 or 9 litres of water was not enough, or the fire built so quickly and was so catastrophic that by the time the operator had got down from the machine, the fire had already well and truly taken hold, which either signifies that there was a really rapid build-up of heat and fire spread, or it had actually been building up heat and there'd been a problem there for some time without the operator perhaps becoming aware. And we certainly learnt that if you have a chaser bin operator in the paddock with you, they are great eyes and ears and a great spotter for the header operator. So there was a lot of good pickups and things noticed early on by those around the header that perhaps had a wider view of what was going on and more situational awareness than sometimes what the operator had. Some newer style chaser bins have been manufactured with water tanks and pumps, and are fitted to assist fire suppression. They've been really effective as well. The human factors, this was, I guess, really interesting part of the research, and one I guess I really want to push home tonight. Fatigue, inexperience, lack of familiarity with equipment, or not knowing their location when trying to report a fire were often factors. And the risk of something going wrong increased when under time pressure, or knowing that the conditions were becoming unfavourable to continue harvesting, but sort of going, yeah, we should probably park up, but we're almost done, so let's just push through and chance it and keep going. I think that's a real warning factor for people to consider. And when I guess the factors are starting to turn unfavourable, rather than just think about it in your head, I'd really encourage you to have a conversation with other people who might be on the same property with you that are harvesting, or even chat to your neighbours and the like on the UHF, or give them a quick call or through WhatsApp or whatever, and see what they're thinking. And it might just confirm that nagging doubt you've got in the back of your mind and give you a bit of peace of mind to go, yep, the neighbours are parking up. I think we will too. So, you know, most people sort of had an idea to go, yeah, we knew we were pushing it. We were pushing the limit. And then lo and behold, something went wrong. So let's park up, shut down for a couple of hours before we get too far into that thinking, I think. The people who had an issue, they were more than willing to share their experience with us, which was really great. And they were very keen to get more information about best practices and the way to prevent these things from happening. Just got a couple of photos here. These are all from just last year. You can see a wiring loom there on the green machine that was getting a bit hot, but that was picked up nice and early, luckily, but the case was a catastrophic loss beside it. This was a job out at Patchy Woollet, sort of between about, for a couple of hours from 11 o'clock at night. Machine just kept dropping hot smoulders out the back of it. And we had, you know, so farmers reporting things as small as this that didn't require a notification of 000, right up to we had 55 hectares of crop. So fortunately, for the number of fires we had, the largest one only got to 55 hectares, which wasn't too bad at all, but probably a fairly decent dollar loss there. And we did put some aircraft on that fire to help keep it small. One of the best things I think you can do is reach out to CFA and get some literature from us. And I think the voluntary grain harvesting table is really important. So use that table there, have a look at your weather and your relative humidity and your wind speed, and then look at the figures there where it certainly recommends that you do shut down. And that is only a recommendation. I need to highlight that in Victoria, we don't have mandatory shutdown powers or the like, but I've got to say the take-up of people just doing the right thing has been enormous, and the influence that our group officers and captains have within their communities can't be underestimated either. So they play a large role in this as well. So where to next? We want to continue this year with the research, get a wider data set and identify trends and emerging issues. And we're going out. I'm up in Coolanong between Swanhill and Robinvale on Wednesday, talking to a pre-harvest workshop there where a lot of the grain growers are getting their workers in. Some have done harvest before, some are brand new to it. So we very much want to get out in the field and start doing exactly what we're doing tonight and talking about it. One of the other things we're doing is we're using crop mapping data to look at where we will do some treatment on roadside. So we certainly can't treat or do fuel reduction on every bit of road right across the Mallee. The kilometres are just too great. But we do want to look at crop data from the satellite to look at where there's cereal crops planted that may cause a fire to continue to run if there's unbroken large tracts of land running north to south in cereal, or even west to east that might have a westerly behind it that could get up and run and have the right fuel loads to really carry over a large period of or a large area of land. So we're looking at where that is and then trying to align our fuel treatment on roadsides as much as we can to that as well. And I'll just give you a small example of that, how it can be useful. So this is a fire at Glenloth from 2 years ago between Glenloth East and Bort. Got up to about 270 hectares, I think, from memory. And then you can see there, the map on the left is a overall map of the fire area, showing what happened. And then you see there the crop map, and you can see that the fire ran into, I think, some either fallow ground. Yeah, it might have been fallow ground, I think. But it stopped, but then to the north, it took off through cereal and kept running and for another kilometre or so. So that just shows us how, you know, it's I guess, ground truths, what we think or how we think this crop mapping will be useful to us for where we do treatment on roadside. So I think the learnings for this audience are to be fully prepared, and this includes your equipment, but especially your people. So don't assume everyone who's working with you on harvest this year knows what you know and knows what to do. So I'd encourage you to discuss the various scenarios and what the immediate action should be when an ignition occurs, and even run, you know, a practice drill. And you might feel a bit silly doing that, but I would even walk people through what the issue is. You know, if this happens, here's what we're going to do. Someone's going to ring 000, or here's the trigger when we're going to dial 000. If it's only this, we can probably manage it ourselves on the farm with our own equipment. But when the emergency gets to this point, or the issue gets to this point, that's a clear trigger that you ring 000. You don't need to wait perhaps to talk to the boss and get his permission. If you're at the point where you know the fire has got away and you've got a major issue, it's just a straight away phone call to 000. You know, and what the rest of your crew are doing in relation to water carts and any other fire suppression equipment that you have on hand, about how they operate that, how they get it to where the problem is, and also about making sure that when the fire trucks arrive from CFA, they can access where the problem is. So our gates open. You know, if you're deep inside a property and you're not near a road, will they be able to find the way in to get to where the problem is? So they're all good things that I'll be pushing this year. And I know I've gone through a fair bit fairly quickly there, so apologies if I did rush through any of it, but that brings it to the end of certainly my slides. But happy to have questions at the end or now, Charles, wherever you want to run that.
Excellent. Thanks, Gavin. If people do have questions, please use the Q&A function and write them in, and we'll take those questions at the conclusion of the presentations. Great to see, Gavin, the research that CFA is doing to improve our learnings around crop fires. With that, we'll move next to David Manifold, and David will be discussing fire safety this hay season. So David, if you'd like to, I believe you've got a presentation as well. Gavin, I think you might need to stop sharing your screen and do a changeover.
Yes, thank you, Charles. I'll just see, hang on, I've hit the wrong button here. If I can share my screen, and I've ended up, there we go, share screen. Would be this one. Share. So can you see my screen now?
Yep, all clear.
Yep, righto. Yeah, thanks very much. My name's David Manifold. I'm a farmer in the Donald area. I'm also a CFA group officer for the Bull Oak West group, and also a member of the Jeffcott Fire Brigade, which is just on the edge of Donald. So I've been asked to do a presentation on how we do modern haymaking techniques and storage. Sorry, I think I'll just fix my thing here. Sorry, bugging that up. Think so? Sorry, apologies, I'm not the greatest person on things. So yeah, starting off on my things, one of the most important things we found with modern haymaking is the use of hay inoculants, essentially. So, and my one of choice is Hayguard. So Hayguard's obviously a sulfur-based chemical compound that turns to a gas inside the bales, and it eats oxygen. So once that happens, it's actually taking oxygen out of the combustion triangle, so then we don't have issues, hopefully, with ignitions or combustion or anything like that. I'll go to the next one. And then in conjunction with those, we're then going to microwave moisture meters, particularly gazebas, because gazebas are the only ones that are building them these days, which do read on big square and small square bales constant moistures. So we've got a full indication of our moistures whilst baling, and then we set parameters on it. So if all of a sudden moisture jumps up, we get a lovely little pink dot or paint colour of your choice painted on the side of the bale, why swear by. I find it one of the most accurate forms of moisture reading, and makes my life a lot easier baling hay. And we can work within parameters, particularly when using hay guard and things like that. So pretty much in the Wimmera Mallee, we're sort of pretty much just growing on my own farm oat and hay for export into Japan and Korea and quite a few other nations. We're sort of getting our haymaking ability shorter and shorter with modern technology and these other chemicals we're using as well. So we've got a nice little thing on what we do when we're making hay. So yeah, that's cutting, which generally, we cut one day, we then carry on and we super condition. So we use these magnificent Australian technology that was built 20 years ago, which commonly known as a super conditioner. It actually crushes the nodes on the plant, effectively drying down the hay in half the time. This year alone, with the weather conditions, we managed to make cereal hay in one paddock in 5 days, using hay guard and things, alleviating sort of things with weather and other stuff like that. Sorry. Oh, sorry, went too far. That. And yeah, it just shows the machine working there. Just a basic system that feeds through on 2 rollers, goes through, thrown up into 2 major heavy steel crushing rollers and crushing the whole crop. Amazing the effects of what happens with it. Carrying on from that, we then have our baling, which, generally we're using hay guard and shorter baling times. We end up with heavier bales, which gives a great return for our efforts. And yeah, using hay guard on hay, export hay, even though we're dealing with lower moistures. So our moistures generally have to be below 14% moisture on oat and hay. By using hay guard, it's taking out sort of limitations where sometimes you get a spike for high moisture and things like that. So I find, particularly when you're pushing the boundaries, using hay guard actually just limits the number of high rising moisture when you're delivering, and they're pretty strict on the deliveries, which most oat and hay growers would know. So yeah, moisture limitations. That's generally a typical moisture reading. So this comes back out of our microwave moisture meter. So you've got an instant moisture, a peak moisture, and an average moisture, and it's not too often they sit like that even. So generally you'll get a spike through somewhere that'll just carry through. And we can set our upper limits to whatever moisture you like. That one there is set for 20. And then it'll set a moisture dot, a painted dot on the side for that. Yeah, we'll keep moving on. This is us cutting veg hay. Got a nice little video for that again too. Just good speeds, covering it. We do prefer to use self-propelled if we can for a wider swath, so we're getting quicker dry downs and better hay in the bale quicker without leaving wheel tracks on it. We tend to leave a narrow windrow like this one here purely for the fact that we're not leaving a wheel mark on it, which again helps our dry down time. So one of the other things we've done now too is we've moved into tedding in the last 4 years. And this is what's been drying our hay down extremely fast, far greater than we ever imagined. I remember telling a silage expert down at a field day from Gippsland that he was barking mad to think we should be doing with this with our hay in the Wimmera Mallee. And then, yeah, 15 years later, here I am doing it. It is great for drying out fast, but it does spread everything out. So we do have time limits. And if it lays there too long, it will bleach. So we do need to try and get it raked within sort of 2 days. But inevitably, because we look like we're throwing it out, and you'd lose more colour. But if you get it raked within 2 days, it looks fantastic. We'll get a little film on that. It's amazing how well it spreads these tighter windrows as well. It can be a slow job, but well worth it in the end. Excellent. So the other thing is we're doing now is we've gone into rotary raking. So we found that using V-rakes creates a sausage in the hay, and it's not aerating and drying properly. The other issue that one of the things we picked up over time by using rotary rakes is we're actually creating a windrow that's not actually blowing in the wind, and it's fairly topical lately after some of the wind we've been having lately. And it's amazing how well they sit there and seem to hold together. But yeah, the aeration or the way they construct the windrow is definitely the greatest thing about these things, and it helps so much with the drying of the hay. It's definitely changed how we're doing it, and a long way better than what we were doing. So getting on to applications of the hay garden things, we're using conjunction to the Gazeka moisture meter. We're using the Gazeka or the Palmer tank, which it is now, to do it. A lot of the systems that we've been using in the past were just basic spray tanks that you buy from the local spray dealer. We find that the setup on this one is so great. You just dial in the tonnes you're baling per hour, and then it works it out. It even calculates to the fact that if you increase your tonnes per hour, it tells you to change nozzles, and just so you're getting the application spot on, because if you're missing it, it's going to be an issue in your hay shed at some stage. So it's really good advice to spend the money and get the right machinery if we're trying to do it this way. On to the next one. So yeah, on to vetch. This is our episode in our first year. We've produced some amazing hay, massive bale weights. We're getting a hay done, baled off the paddock in record time. We're also staying away from doing desiccations prior to cutting with this system, because pretty much we're off the paddock within 7 days. When we're doing our accelerated hay, essentially with using Hayguard, we're working on sort of 16% average moisture, but we're doing sap moisture. We're not actually doing dew moisture. So obviously, well, I'll best explain it, but yeah, there's the difference between sap and dew moisture is that sap moisture doubles overnight on a normal bale, whereas dew moisture halves. So when we're doing this, once we've baled at our average of 16% moisture, moisture then becomes irrelevant. Once it's in the bale, we're actually then concentrating our efforts on temperature, and then we're sort of watching that properly with some temperature probes that I'll show up shortly. We're also still doing, obviously, baling weather damaged hay, so we still push the boundaries a bit, but we're not going that far, but still using Hayguard on it purely to take that air out of oxygen. And you know, you're always going to get wet spots in your bales and things like that, particularly if it's been weather damaged. So it's a great idea to try and do this to restrict any damage and increase the palatability of your hay. One of the most interesting things I've found out in recent times is we've been using gibberellic acid for our essentially stirring up our vetch hays to make it stand up prior to cutting. But one of the things that I've noticed is that it actually opens the cells of the plant up that much that it's actually helping with dry down. So we're actually achieving anywhere between 8 to 10% drier plants within 7 days than without it. But the negative to that is that last year with all the rains, because the cells were so open, it actually filled the whole plant full of disease and pretty much just killed it. But I think it was inevitable with the amount of rain we had that was going to happen. So it was just really, really interesting to see. But yeah, this year it sort of sealed my thoughts on the whole thing, that how quickly it dries things down. And just a great thing that I found out of recent times. When we're storing our hay, we're sort of always trying to keep ventilation between them. Always, you know, just trying to breathe, trying to work it out. We do inevitably, when we're trying to do hay our way, or with the accelerated hay way, we do get high moisture ones. So you'll see on the right of the screen, there's paint dots on the bales. So we actually bring them in, and we do have shed room, so that helps. But we'll leave them sitting in the shed for, I don't know, 4 to 10 days, sort of thing like this, just to make sure they breathe, and then stack them sort of near the edge of the sheds and places where we can keep a close eye on them. one of the things we've learnt the most out of stuff out of the US is that a lot of shedding in the US has no walls. And we've been trying to work out why, and a lot of it's based on the fact that there's getting airflow through. So it's helping with keeping the hay cool and helping it breathe. So we need to start considering going away from these magnificent sheds with beautiful walls to back to hay sheds with just roofs, just purely so we have less risk. We're also using these temperature probes. So farms can now sell these probes that they're not cheap, but I think they're a worthwhile investment. You buy a pack, it comes with 20 probes. So we sort of strategically place them through the stack. They go down, and then it goes onto a magnificent app that was developed out of Denmark, I think it was. And it gives you a full tracking of how the temperature goes. So essentially we can start off at 20 degrees, particularly in some of these hays, and using the hay gardens, we'll see them spike right out as high as nearly 50 degrees. And then that's within about 4 days. And then after that, they come back down. And within the space of about sort of 10 to 15 days, you can see them come right back down to 20 degrees. It's pretty incredible to see what they do. But, you know, as a haymaker, it's actually quite comforting to know that I can tell you what temperature my haystacks are at any time. You know, the old crowbar method's great if you go and check it. So these things send out an alert if they get to high temperature and things like that. You set them to different parameters, and I find they work really well. But yeah, their only downfall is that for the first kit is $5,000. So it's pretty serious money, but well worth it if you're into some good haymaking. One of my last slides essentially is getting back to some of the stuff that Gavin was talking about with machine hygiene. And one of the things that I love the most, and I think most farmers should have one. It's a thing that is so great for what we're doing in our farms, just blowing machines down. It's 180 CFM compressor. I bought mine secondhand off a shotcrete company in Geelong, considerably cheaper than a brand new one. But great for sort of taking out any fire risk on any of machinery, and the added benefit of no weed seeds and things like that being spread around from paddock to paddock or farm to farm if we do go shifting through into other areas. So my last slide is just something on what's going to happen in the future, and some of these things that we need to do, what we're looking at with some of this accelerated hay is looking at some of these systems that are coming out of Europe, and this one's pretty cool. It's a little machine that's sitting all the bales on an aeration bed, and they rotate the bales to keep them cool and let them breathe. So I'm not sure we're going to get to this extreme, but it's something that makes you think about how we're doing for your hay into the future. And I think that's about it for me, if that's all right.
Excellent. Thank you, David, for your perspective and experience and what you're doing in your business. Certainly worthwhile sharing this with other farmers to make sure that they are looking after things. David, I understand you might have to leave us. Please feel free when you need to, and if I can get you to stop sharing your screen as well. With that, you're right. With that, I'll invite John Darcy, Senior Farm Safety Advisor with the VFS Making Our Farm Safer project.
Thanks, Charles, and good evening, everyone. With Gavin spoke earlier about having a chat with your employees about being out in the paddock and what they would do in those scenarios, and just even practicing in your head or rehearsing what you would do in those crisis situations. And when we talk with employers about their OHS duties, we talk to them about their duty to consult with their employees about matters that affect their safety, and talk to them about having a toolbox meeting. And Gavin pretty much encapsulated a good subject matter for a toolbox meeting right there. Just adding to some of the things that Gavin spoke about, in particular around the preparedness on the farm. When I do farm walks and I do farm inspections, I am looking at and seeing water carts with pumps attached to them. I am also seeing some farmers were fortunate enough to inherit, if I use that word, some of the old CFA fire trucks that were surplus stock and then put out to market, and some of the farmers acquired those. What I stress the importance of to start with, just stay conscious of the paddock, is the importance of making sure that you test your pumps, your hoses, run some water through them before you take them out in the paddock and make sure they're working properly. With the old fire trucks, the CFA, every time they would respond to a fire, the fire services, they take them back and run them through, hang them up, and make sure they were fit for purpose before they put them back out to use again. So it was actually obviously part of their processes, their procedures. What worries me is with a farmer that might go out to a paddock and have a catastrophe where their hoses burst or their pumps don't work. And so do make sure you test and inspect your equipment, and in particular your fire extinguishers as well. Really, really important. There was an example with a farmer that did have a fire last year with when a few acres got away from him because his equipment wasn't functional, and he's obviously then ringing the CFA, but unfortunately it got away from him. And if he had been better equipped and prepared to know that his equipment was in good working order, he could have been ahead of the game. What in particular where I was keen to speak and engage is more bringing it back to the home and the risk of fires in that space as well. And when I talk about the home, I'm talking about your farm sheds and buildings. If you are a follower of the Making Our Farm Safer project, you'll see the monthly Making Our Farm Safer newsletter, and the next edition comes out in a day or so. And there's a article specifically on the topic that I'm about to talk to. Today, through our social media channels, the Making Our Farm Safer LinkedIn and Facebook pages, we also put a video recording where I'm talking to the screen, just talking to the detail I'm about to talk to now, about the importance for farmers to have emergency procedures for their employees for the farm. So when I do a farm walk, I'm looking walking through the sheds, and I talk about this at the dining table with the farmers. And my eyes are darting to the left or right of the door or doorway or to the walls. What I'm looking for is a set of emergency procedures. And what I'm talking about there is 3 key ingredients. The first being a floor plan of your sheds and your buildings. And Google Maps or Google Earth or drones are really useful for taking overhead shots of your farm and farm buildings. And on that, if you can print out your overhead shot, you can then plot where your fire extinguishers, your first aid kits are located, and also your emergency assembly area, where if you've got 2 or 3 employees on the farm working in the sheds, really important that you're all congregated together in the same location and that everyone knows where everyone is. Alongside that, a list of emergency contact phone numbers, and through the presentations, we've obviously emphasised 000 as being the main number, and everyone obviously that jumps front of mind in catastrophic circumstances with police, fires, and ambulance. But the other numbers that could be important would be the nearest hospital, the nearest medical clinic. So in some country areas, the nearest hospital could be in the major town or regional area. But the nearest medical clinic or medical facility or doctor's rooms could be just a few k's down the road. And if someone is badly hurt or injured, you may not be able to get them to the hospital, which may be too far away or not necessarily able to wait for an ambulance. So you need to look and think about which other medical facilities are closer available. Alongside the contact phone numbers for the police, fire, ambos, and the medical facilities, also gas, water, and electricity. And with electricity in particular, if someone makes contact with overhead power lines, the risk to the person of electrocution, but also the risk of fire as well, that might come from that, particularly if power lines are dislodged, and therefore risks there too. And therefore the need to ring the relevant electrical supplier and have the power cut off, or have them attend to it as soon as possible, so as to address that electrical risk. And so important to have the relevant utility numbers on the wall in amongst those lists of emergency contact phone numbers. And then obviously your own phone numbers, the relevant phone numbers of the management personnel to be able to contact. And obviously the other means of communication, two-way radio, CBs, whatever it is that you use as your means of communication on the farm, given that some areas don't have good mobile coverage. So the floor plan, the emergency contact phone numbers list, and the third one is the CFA's standard fire orders poster. And that's 6-step points, what to do in emergency situations. And when I engage with farmers, I express to them that if we're talking with CFA or if you're talking with WorkSafe in particular, these things are typically regarded as having a good set of procedures in a farm building. Now, when I'm sitting at the dining table with farmers and doing the walk around, I'm saying to them, go down to Bunnings or the hardware store and buy themselves 3 or 4 notice boards or whiteboards and plonk those documents on the notice board. And I'm looking in the chemical shed, the machinery workshop area, and also the shearing shed, if you've got shearing sheds as well. These things should be clearly visible on the walls. When I'm also doing the walk around, I'm looking at first aid kits, but I'm also looking at fire extinguishers. And I do see a lot of fire extinguishers that are in really, really poor states of repair and not serviced and maintained. There are still some branches of the CFA around the region of Victoria that still do provide the testing and tagging services, but that's not necessarily commercially viable for them to operate that way, but some still do offer that service. But otherwise, the expectation would be that you are definitely required to provide a safe workplace, and that includes making sure that you are prepared for emergency situations, including having adequate fire extinguishers properly maintained and serviced. You can engage fire services contractor companies like FES and a few other companies that provide testing services who will come out and recharge with fire extinguishers. But typically, I'm recommending to farmers they should go and probably buy 3, 4, 5 extinguishers. A typical walkthrough on a farm is I'm typically recommending 4 or 5 fire extinguishers. And when I'm looking for the fire extinguishers, I'm looking for them near the doors, near the entries, or at the front of the machinery shed. Some farmers say to me, oh, look, they're over there and they're on the ground and they're cluttered together, a couple of old fire extinguishers. And I make the point to them, you don't want to go into the fire to go and get the fire extinguisher. They should be readily accessible. And when you buy them, they come with the hard plastic cover bags that go over the top, and that can protect them from the elements if you've got an open shed. But really important, you've got adequate fire extinguishers. So typically, one near the machinery shed, one in the workshop, definitely one in the shearing shed, one in your chemical shed. And if you have fuel stands, for unleaded fuel in particular, you need to have one within 8 metres of the unleaded fuel stand. Now, that's not for the unleaded fuel stand. If it goes up, well, no, everyone will be running and getting away from that. But that's for the quad bike fire or the tractor fire before it gets to the fuel stand. And so, really important you have adequate fire extinguishers that are properly serviced and maintained, up to date, and usable in those emergency situations. What type are we recommending? Dry chem is what we recommend typically, because they do pretty much put out all fire types. Conscious with the water type ones that they are suitable for paper and timber type fires, but not necessarily suitable for electrical or fuel type fires. So we typically recommend the red with white stripe dry chem. To that, if you wish to just go over that ground, we've uploaded the standard fire orders poster onto the Making Our Farm Safer web pages. Also, we have a template that we've uploaded today for the emergency contact phone numbers template for farmers to be able to use. And so the only thing we can't create for you is the floor plan of your farm, because that's probably beyond our superpowers. But as I said, Google Maps or Google Earth is really good for taking overhead shots. I did it myself as an example for a farm, and you'll actually see that in our newsletter to see what one looks like as a good floor plan. And so this is also something we'd say consistent with what Gavin said about talking to your employees about the being ready for out the paddock. Talk to your employees at toolbox meetings sometimes throughout the course of the year about here are our emergency procedures. Here's the floor plan. Here's where the first aid kits are located. Here are the fire extinguishers. Here's the assembly area. Think about that also in the context of your immediate family in terms of the house. What would they do in emergency scenarios as well? And their capacity. And the other thing I know that Gavin and would obviously talk to as well is making sure you've got your bushfire preparedness plans ready as well. Should things get out of hand, that you know where you're going to go to. And it may not necessarily be your farm that's at risk, but the farms that are in other areas that it may come across and blow across and affect your farm as well. Please, yes, if you're not subscribed, do subscribe to the monthly Making Our Farm Safer newsletter, but keep an eye out for that edition and also the social media channels and have a look at those and download those resources. That's it from me, Charles. I'll hand it back to you, mate.
Thank you, John. As always, very clear tips and information. If you haven't seen the information from the VFF's Making Our Farm Safer project, strongly encourage you to get onto the website and seeking out those resources, and also seeking a farm safety visit. The VFF is working hard to keep the farm safety project going. It is making a real difference to ensuring we are keeping our farms safe and everyone getting home safe at night. With that, just a couple of questions for Gavin that have just come through. Gavin, just regarding the research that you highlighted, is that publicly available, and where are people able to access any of that information?
Yeah, thanks, Charles. We haven't published a document as yet. We've gathered last year's data and we've presented it to our senior volunteers and also internally within CFA, but we don't yet have it in a format where it's probably right for publication. When I look at some of the reports done by Dr. Graham Quick and the like, we're not at that stage yet. So we hope to have something to release down the track. But and I think our data set from last year, we were still finding our way with the questions, and it was a bit of an exceptional year given that we sort of had flood right up to harvest. So we want to sort of get some data over some typical years as well. So not just yet, I guess, is the not so short answer.
Very good, thank you. Another question just regarding some of the things that were happening in South Australia earlier this year with the proposed changes to the grain harvesting code of practice. That obviously had some consternation amongst farmers over the border. You noted before about the voluntary harvest guide that we have in Victoria. Are you aware of any concerns in Victoria as to enforcing or potential to enforce mandatory code?
No, I'm not aware of any steps that CFA's or Victoria's moving towards a mandatory code. And I watch with interest the events in South Australia, and I think CFS then they stepped back from their initial, I think, proposal of where FBI and the level of FBI was going to be their, I guess, their tipping point. They've stepped back from that and returned back to previous levels. There was certainly a fair bit of pushback. We watched it with interest in CFA, and we don't have any intention to change. One thing that has changed a little bit in the Mallee is we have now gone, so total fire ban days are now driven by a fire behaviour index rather than a fire danger index. We're suspecting that might lead to slightly more total fire ban days, given that our chief officer seems to be prepared to call a total fire ban day when the FBI exceeds 50 in the Mallee. And one of the factors that is under the old FDI, the fuel load that we used for the calculations was grassland. Now for FBI, there's a range of fuels that are used, one of which is Mallee Heath, and that seems to really elevate the FBI numbers, which may take us into total fire band A more often than has happened before. That does have some impact for grain farmers, as I think they're very much insurance company driven, who would say, hey, insurance company saying you shut down on total fire band day. So there's a potential impact from that, but not through any mandatory shutdowns like they have in other states.
Thank you. John, a question to you. Is there any checklist available for farmers in terms of, for instance, having fire extinguishers, where they should be located, that sort of information that could assist people, particularly with their pre-season checks?
Charles, the video that we produced on our social media channels today and in the monthly newsletter, we've covered off on the subject matter I talked about tonight, but we didn't go into the detail of where to put your fire extinguishers. But I can take that on notice and actually include that in the next edition of the newsletter. So I'll commit to doing that, to highlight to farmers and probably emphasise that message that it's not adequate to have them on the tractor or inside the shed or sitting on the ground inside the shed, but the emphasis, they need to be readily accessible quickly. And so we'll add to what we're putting out there. I did have a question online, if no one saw it there, which was also, where do you get the poster I referred to with the 6-step points, what to do in emergency situations? The poster is referred to as the standard fire orders poster, and that's readily available online as a downloadable resource, but we've made it available on the Making Our Farm Safer website, and it's actually linked in the newsletter that's coming out tomorrow. And so for those who want to get that poster, keep an eye out for the newsletter and then just click on the link and download a copy.
Excellent. Thanks, John. And Gavin, one last question for you. I was at a VFF St Arnaud branch meeting last night. A lot of interest in the transmission line issue there. Has CFA got much in the way of guidance to farmers and private units operating around transmission lines, or also just general power lines as well? And also, what are the rules for CFA operating around transmission lines as well?
Yeah, I think CFA did put out a media release this week, which I suspect has been prompted probably by that proposed transmission line that's going to go through St Arnaud Way, and also I think cuts through a corner of District 18 here in the Mallee as well. And to paraphrase that media release, it was certainly saying that CFA already believes that we have adequate practices in relation to safety around those type of lines, which is we do not fight fires underneath the line. So it's another hazard, I guess, that's out there on our fire ground. And it then means that we try and put the fire out before it gets to the transmission line, or we have to allow the fire to burn underneath it. And then we then make another attempt beyond the transmission line to extinguish. So, and not certainly being an expert on the line that is proposed, but the media release did say that CFA at this stage we're thinking their procedures currently should be sufficient for fighting fires around and under this new proposed line as well.
Very good. Thank you, Gavin. And of course, the VFF is looking at these issues very closely, and a number of our members, both as VFF members, but also in their roles as CFA members, are pushing these issues to make sure that we're ensuring safety around these new developments, and as well as renewable energy facilities that are being constructed throughout the Wimmera Mallee. With that, we will leave it for this evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
If I may, Charles, just quickly. Yep. I'll be joining Gavin with the Coolonong event, which is on Friday. It's a pre-harvest workshop with a few local farmers, and commend these farmers for their efforts in pulling this together pretty quickly. There'll be people actually doing demonstrations on safety checks on farm machinery. So exactly talking the detail that we're talking about tonight as well, covering off the importance of making sure you obviously open the guards and check for debris and hay and the materials that are going to create the fire risk and other safety issues related to the machinery. I'll be talking at the start of that about farmer legal obligations, including worker obligations as well. And then we've got the CFA on hand as well. And that's being coordinated by those farmers, but also with Birchip Cropping Group and ORM. And we're very happy to support them with that event. So if you are in that region and you can make it up to Coolonong for the day, it starts from 10 a.m. But you do need to register, and I think there's a $20 fee to attend. But if you can make it up there, it'd definitely be worthwhile.
Thank you, John. Please look out for that event and other events across the state that's looking at pre-season checks as well. With that, we'll leave it there for this evening. This webinar will be recorded, so please do, it will be on the VFF website. Please do share it with your networks and fellow farmers. Best wishes for harvest, and have a good night.